My husband, Alan White, was serene and detached, disdaining any quarrel. To protect him, I forced myself to become a tough, hard-edged wife. When his spot to study abroad was stolen, I went to the school leaders and argued until I got it back. He said I'd made us, as educated people, lose face. Whenever he lent things out, he never asked for them back. I had to be the one to get them returned. He thought I was petty. He gained the good reputation, and I became the tigress. I always believed he understood me, and we stayed together for 60 years. A month after I died, he married his first love, Emily. At the wedding, Alan spoke with deep feeling. When you're with someone who shares your interests, even a moment is eternal. With someone you don't love, every moment is pain. Our son even sighed, if only Mom weren't around, Dad could have a perfect marriage, and I'd have a gentle mother. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day I fought for Alan's study abroad slot. This time, I wasn't going to be the tigress I had been. I wanted to see how long he could keep up that serene detachment. Sister-in-law, you can't say I stole the boss's slot to go abroad. Someone said to me. When the leader asked him, he himself said he didn't care whether he went and would follow whatever arrangement was made. Of course, I should give the chance to the colleague who actively fights for it. Hank came to me several times to make his case. If the boss hadn't told me, I would have thought he didn't want it. I opened my eyes to find the school leaders and colleagues chiming in together, justifying how they had taken my husband's place. And the person whose spot had been taken, my husband, Alan White, was tugging at my sleeve, impatient. Let's go. We're educated people. We can't make a scene like this. It isn't dignified. Seeing this, I realized clearly that I had been reborn. Reborn to the moment when I was making a scene with the school leaders to get back the study abroad slot that had been taken from Alan. Alan had always been mild and aloof, never fighting for anything. When the school handed out holiday gifts, he always went last and brought home the dented, unwanted leftovers. If neighbors wanted to borrow our things, he lent them freely but never asked for them back. Whenever I brought it up, he would wave it off. It's just small stuff. Why fuss so much? Those little things weren't expensive, but buy them 10 times a month, and it added up. Alan was a professor, but lofty. He lived only on his fixed salary. We still had children to raise, and money was tight. We couldn't afford that kind of waste, so after his generosity, I had to be the one who counted every penny. At work, he was the same. Never scrambling, never competing. Even though his teaching, publications, and research results were among the best, the good opportunities never came to him. He often said, "I'm a researcher. How can I care about those external things?" Faced with such a serene husband, I felt helpless. If we kept living the way he did, our family would fall apart. Yet I believed that only by keeping him free of mundane worries could he focus on his research. So, to protect his childlike purity, I had to stand up on my own. I changed, from gentle to fierce, from generous to exacting, to fight for what my husband and our family were owed. Only then could I keep this household going. When I learned his study abroad slot had been stolen, I couldn't bear it. Burning with anger, I rushed to the school and argued with the leaders until I won it back. But that was also the day I became thoroughly notorious at a university, my name a byword for tigress. People pitied Alan endlessly, marveling that such a serene man had married a woman like me. Poor man, they said. Alan would sigh to them, "Well, I've married her already. What else can I do? I'm not the kind of person who would get a divorce." I once thought my marriage was at least a happy one. My husband, a professor admired by all, and our son, promising. I inherited my husband's career after him and became a university professor myself. Although our life together was full of bumps and stumbles, Alan and I still managed to spend 60 years together. When I passed away at 82, it was a peaceful death. But my soul did not leave. Instead, it drifted in the flow of time. I thought God must have known I couldn't let go of my husband and my child, so he was letting me keep watching over them. What I didn't expect was that just 1 month after my death, Alan married his first love, Emily. I floated at the wedding, watching Alan, who had always worn that calm, indifferent expression, now smiling like a full-bloom chrysanthemum on his deeply wrinkled face. Applause thundered through the venue, and the atmosphere was warm and lively. Alan took the microphone, speaking with deep affection, thanking heaven for allowing him, at such an old age, to finally marry the woman he had loved from the very beginning. "We may not have much time left," he said, "but to spend even a few years with a partner whose heart and mind match mine is still a blessing. Being with someone who shares your interests makes even a moment eternal. Being with someone you don't love makes every moment pain." He even recited a poem, 100 years of true yearning, red candles lifting a first love dream. 60 years apart, scattered like swallows, no letter could write the song of longing. Then the big screen lit up, displaying photographs of them in their youth and the letters they had exchanged without interruption for 60 years. In the photos, he was handsome and confident, his eyes warm with laughter, she was delicate and gentle. On the letters, both of their handwriting was elegant and refined, every stroke dripping with longing. The audience erupted into applause again, praising Professor White as a true gentleman and saying how well he matched such a tender, refined woman. If only they had been able to marry back then, without his original wife in the way, someone said. Who knows how happy they could have been in this life. I heard his ex-wife was an uneducated tigress. What a pity that Professor White wasted half his life with her. In the photos, Alan's eyes were full of warmth, his smile gentle, nothing like the cold, impatient expression he wore when taking pictures with me. And those uninterrupted letters over 60 years made it clear that his love for Emily had never ended. Seeing all of this, even as a ghost, I wanted to cry. It turned out the man I had shared a bed with all my life had been thinking of another woman from start to finish. The happy marriage I believed in was nothing but a joke. Then my son, Mark White, now over 50, came on stage. My heart stirred with a flicker of hope, thinking he might speak up for me. After all, I had nearly given my life to bring him into the world and had poured endless effort into raising him. But I was disappointed. He offered his blessings to Alan and Emily. "Dad, Aunt Emily, congratulations on finally becoming a couple after all these years," he said. He even hugged Emily and added, "Aunt Emily, you have no idea how much I've wished for a gentle and understanding mother like you." He didn't say it outright, but everyone could hear it. Mark was criticizing his own mother for being harsh. Mark was bright but mischievous, and as his mother, I had naturally disciplined him strictly. I walked him to and from school, supervised his homework, and enrolled him in numerous extracurricular classes. Under my tiger mother guidance, he was admitted to the best university and, like his father, became a professor. I thought that, as an adult, he would understand my intentions back then. Yet even now, he still resented and blamed me. I had been a fool. After that, I watched Emily move into the home I had maintained for 60 years. She and Alan recited poetry to each other, tended flowers, and lived like a pair of fairy tale lovers. My son treated her better than he ever treated me, his own mother. He even remarked, "If only Mom weren't around, Dad could have a perfect marriage, and I'd have a gentle mother." A wrong marriage only brought unhappiness to everyone. In their eyes, my lifetime of devotion had been nothing but a mistake and a source of misery. How laughable, how utterly laughable. Perhaps heaven felt my overwhelming unwillingness to accept this fate, because I was reborn. I couldn't return to the very beginning to erase everything, but now I was only 15 years into my marriage with Alan, back in the energetic 1980s. I believed there was still time. I quickly steadied my mind, silently sidestepping Alan's attempts to pull me along. Then, completely changing my earlier tone, I smiled at the school leaders and said, "Mr. White told you he didn't care about these external matters, but when he came home, he seemed quite upset. I thought he really wanted this spot, so I came here for that reason." Looks like I misunderstood. You did the right thing. Opportunities should go to those who take the initiative to fight for them. Everyone at the scene turned to look at me, clearly not expecting this change in attitude. The school leader, who had seen plenty in his time, was the first to recover. "Didn't expect you to be so understanding, Mrs. White. That's just perfect. The boss always said you were hard to deal with, but now I see you have to spend time with someone to really know what they're like. And who knew? Here at school, Alan never says a word and doesn't fight for anything, but at home, he complains and gets you to fight for him." He turned to Alan, patted his shoulder, and looked at him meaningfully. "Alan, if you want something, just say so. You act all lofty every day, so we assume you don't want anything. Naturally, we wouldn't arrange anything for you. Don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunities to study abroad. If it doesn't work out this time, I'll make sure you're first in line next time. Alan seemed to snap out of his daze, opened his mouth to explain, but in the end said nothing. Just gave an awkward smile. The leader added a couple more polite lines, then prepared to leave. Before going, he smiled at me. Mrs. White, don't worry. With you supporting the school's work like this, I'll be sure to spread the word about how virtuous and considerate you are. With that, he left with the others, still smiling. Only Alan and I remained. His face was dark. Lisa, why would you say that? How could you tell them what we talk about at home? Inside, I sneered. How could I not know exactly what Alan was thinking? He actually cared about everything, but didn't want to tarnish his reputation for being detached and above it all. So he played the pitiful victim to me, pushing me to fight for him, forcing me into the role of the so-called tigress. And then he turned around and resented me for it, saying I was overbearing and unpleasant. What I'd done today not only cost him the thing he wanted, it also stripped away the facade he wore in front of the leaders. Naturally, he was furious. I'd always known how to deal with people who pretended to be lofty, but in the past, I'd loved him, pitied him, and couldn't see him clearly, let alone bring myself to go against him. But now, I smiled at him. Didn't you just tell me to stop making a scene and go home? I was only listening to you. Is that wrong? Besides, you've always said we walk the straight path and have nothing to hide from others. Unless, of course, your words aren't something you can repeat in public. He never said that before. Alan was instantly choked into silence. After a long pause, he still couldn't speak. He shook his sleeves in frustration and went home. Our current home was an old apartment allocated to him by the university, 2 bedrooms and a study. Not large, but I kept it warm and tidy. As soon as we got home, Alan locked himself in the study. Whenever he was unhappy or we quarreled, that's where he would go. And we quarreled often, big fights every 3 days, small ones every 2. When I thought about it, I realized he'd spent more than half his time at home inside that study. In the past, he would only come out if I bowed my head first. But now, as I looked at the closed door, I sneered inwardly. He might as well stay in there forever and stop being an eyesore. Just then, the front door opened again. It was my son, Mark White, coming home from school. He was 14 now, in his 2nd year of junior high. Of course, I loved him. Who doesn't love their own child? But after my death, the way he acted had left me bitterly disappointed. Still, right now, he hadn't done any of that yet. If he could be set straight, I would still continue being a good mother to him. But soon, Mark's words made me lose hope. Seeing the study door shut tight, he frowned and said, "Mom, what did you do to upset Dad again? You're always focused on those petty material things. Stop picking stupid fights with him over trivial stuff." My heart sank. So Mark had already been siding with Alan this early on, even though Alan had always been a hands-off father to him, while I had given up my own career to raise him. I pressed on, unwilling to give up. "Mark, aren't you even going to ask why we argued? Shouldn't you at least figure out who's right and who's wrong?" Mark rolled his eyes. "Do I really need to ask? Dad's not the type to nitpick. It's you who's always looking for trouble. Without you stirring things up, we wouldn't have so many problems at home. Mom, can't you try being a little gentler? Dad likes gentle women. It's completely normal he wouldn't like a tigress like you." So that's what he thought. And what did that last sentence mean? My chest went cold. I stared at him. "And how do you know your dad doesn't like me and prefers gentle women? Where did you hear that?" Guilt flickered across his face, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I guessed. Who would like someone as fierce as you? Of course he'd like gentle women." With that, he turned quickly toward his bedroom. "I still have homework. Call me when dinner's ready." I was his mother. How could I not see that he was lying? In the past, he would always play for a while before I had to urge him several times to do his homework. Never had he been this eager to shut himself away. In that moment, I realized with complete clarity, my son had long known about Alan and his first love, Emily. And not only had he never warned me, he had probably been hoping all along that Emily would become his mother. The hurt was sharp, but it was followed by a sense of relief. Good. Now I had no reason left to hesitate. I could act boldly. And as for cooking for those 2 freeloaders who expected meals to appear without lifting a finger, forget it. I packed a set of clothes and left the house. It wasn't running away from home. I went to find my best friend, Zoe Yan, to prepare for divorce. Zoe had gone into the clothing business, something Alan always looked down on. But the truth was, in these times, Zoe was making tens of thousands a year, while Alan was supporting the whole family on a monthly salary of just a few dozen dollars. After our marriage, he had repeatedly tried to stop me from seeing Zoe. With housework piling up, my contact with her had gradually faded. Last year, Zoe had asked me to help with her business. I had been tempted, but with Alan opposing it, I refused. I worried she might have grown distant from me. But now, I couldn't think of anyone more suitable to turn to. When I explained that I planned to get a divorce, she hugged me warmly and even clapped her hands. Finally, you've come to your senses. That man never loved you. I've been wanting to tell you to stop being his doormat for years. So, how do you want me to help? I was deeply moved. I want you to help me find a good divorce lawyer, lend me a camera, and help me get in touch with a newspaper reporter. And, would you still be willing to hire me to work with you? Zoe agreed without hesitation. Of course. I hugged her in return, showing my first genuine smile since being reborn. It felt so good. I hadn't completely failed. I still had a friend I could rely on. At Zoe's warm invitation, I stayed 3 more days before returning home. The place was a mess. Alan and Mark were either at work or at school. No one was home. I had deliberately chosen a time when they would both be gone. I went into Alan's study. In the past, he'd always said that even between husband and wife, you had to respect each other's privacy. So apart from cleaning, I never stepped foot in there. I had given him all the respect he wanted, and in return, he had kept a 60-year correspondence with his first love behind my back. Now, that very habit made it easier for me to find proof of his affair. It took me less than a minute to find the letters. They were sitting right in the drawer of his desk, not even locked. I couldn't help but laugh. So this was what Alan relied on, thinking that because I loved him, he could act without fear. Even though I'd already seen these letters once at their wedding in my previous life, looking at them now still made my stomach turn. I quickly took photos of the letters with the camera, then kept them in hand and waited for the 2 whites to come home. By 7 p.m., they both returned one after the other. The moment Alan saw me, his face hardened. So you do remember to come back? Is this how a wife and mother should act? Disappearing without a word, who knows where you've been messing around? Mark's tone wasn't any better. Mom, why would you leave without telling us? We were starving that day because of you. Whatever, just go make dinner. I want sweet and sour ribs. His voice was full of blame, without even a trace of concern for me. I couldn't be bothered with pointless talk. I simply threw the letters onto the table. I may not be worthy, but is a man who's been married over a decade and still writes to his first love every day really worthy of being a father and a husband? Alan's face instantly changed. Lisa, are you crazy? Don't you understand what it means to respect someone's privacy? How could you read my letters? He stepped forward, trying to snatch them from my hands. I sneered, sidestepping with ease. And respecting you got me what? Over 10 years of you secretly contacting your first love. Maybe it's time we skip the respect. Alan's anger boiled over, his usual calm and detached facade completely gone. You crazy tigress. How could I ever like someone like you? Emily and I just exchanged the occasional greeting, purely innocent, and you can't let it go? The world is more open now. Divorce isn't rare. I've been responsible by putting up with you. You think I'm afraid to divorce you? At that moment, my son chimed in to take his father's side. Mom, stop it already and apologize to Dad. Dad and Aunt Emily live far apart. They just write letters sometimes. Why do you have to be so petty? The more you act like this, the less Dad will like you. And right now, you're living entirely off him. If you get divorced, where will you even go? I'm telling you now, I'm not going with you to suffer. Alan immediately grew smug. Lisa, I'm the one supporting you. Don't take your good fortune for granted. If you divorce me, you'll know what real hardship is. Looking at this father and son pair, united against me, I couldn't stop the anger that rose in my chest. I had once been a textile factory worker. After Mark was born and there was no one to care for him, I quit my job. When he was older and I wanted to work again, Alan crushed my confidence, saying that after years away, I was out of touch and no company would hire me. After being beaten down again and again, I lost the will to look for work entirely. Yet the son I raised felt no gratitude. In his eyes, Alan was the one who supported the family, and I was just a useless woman who couldn't find a job. Suddenly, it all felt pointless. I looked at them calmly, but my voice was firm. Since that's how it is, then let's get divorced. Alan's eyes widened in disbelief, and after a moment of playing dumb, he gave a cold laugh. So you're the one asking for divorce. Don't regret it later. I sneered. Whoever regrets it is a coward. Tomorrow we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and get the divorce papers. Seeing I was resolute, Alan's forehead veins stood out in rage. Unbelievable. Have you been fooling around outside? I slapped him across the face. Alan White, if you're going to accuse someone, you'd better have proof. The proof of your affair is in my hands. Tell me, if I show these letters to everyone in the compound, will your prestigious reputation as Professor White still hold up? Alan's raised hand froze in midair. He might have just claimed that he and Emily were purely platonic. But deep down, he knew exactly what those letters meant. What do you want? What will it take for you to give them back? I lifted the letters slightly. The family's entire savings go to me, and I'll return the letters to you. Then I turned my gaze toward Mark. He visibly tensed for a moment, then quickly said, I'm not going with you, so give up that idea. That was exactly the sentence I'd been waiting for. I turned to him at once. You heard him. If our son wants to be with you, then fine. I won't fight you for custody. I glanced at the house. As for this place, it was assigned to Alan by the university. I can't take it, and naturally I won't. Alan's face flushed red. You're taking all the savings, Lisa. You're being outrageous. That money is all from my hard work. Instead of getting angry, I let out a sharp laugh. Oh? So Professor White, the man who claims to be above all worldly concerns, actually cares about money. I thought only small-minded people like me cared about such things. Either give me the money and I'll return the letters, or don't, and watch your romantic escapades spread through the entire university and faculty housing. With that, I wheeled my suitcase out of the home I had lived in for 15 years. In the end, Alan agreed to give me all the savings. After all, he had a steady monthly salary and wasn't short of everyday expenses. The savings amounted to only 1,000 yuan, scraped together over the years through my own frugality. The real reason he agreed was because he didn't want his reputation ruined over a few $100s. I wanted that money for 2 reasons. First, so those 2 shameless people wouldn't get to enjoy it, and second, as my seed money for a new life. Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, father and son glared at me with open hostility. Lisa, I hope you don't regret your decision today, Alan said coldly. Mark shook his head in disapproval. Mom, I really don't understand how you could do this. You've just torn apart a perfectly good family. I looked at them calmly. Don't worry. From now on, you walk your sunny road and I'll cross my narrow bridge. I won't bother either of you again. Then I turned and walked away, a cold smile on my lips. Sunny road? Alan could keep dreaming. After the divorce, plenty of people asked why we had split. Divorce was still rare in these times. Most of the time, I just smiled without answering. Alan, however, played the victim, his words full of insinuations. You know how fierce she is. Our marriage was never good. For the sake of our child, I didn't want to be the one to betray our vows, so I kept things going. But then she spent time with that friend of hers who went into business and came back asking for a divorce. Truly an unfortunate family. When Zoe heard this, she was furious and wanted to confront Alan, but I stopped her. After all, when God wants to destroy someone, he first makes them mad with arrogance. A month later, Alan married Emily, who had also divorced. The news didn't surprise me. Whether at 80 or at 40, Alan was equally impatient to be with her. Their wedding this time was far less lavish than in my past life. Partly because of the times, partly because I had taken all his savings. I heard he even had to borrow the wedding money, promising to repay it with the cash gifts. The couple stood at the door to greet guests, with 2 teenage boys behind them. One was Mark, the other must have been Emily's son. Alan looked elated, just as proud and energetic as in my past life. When he saw me, he actually smiled for once. Playing the magnanimous man, he said, I didn't expect you to really come. I'm starting a new life now, so I won't hold past grudges against you. We can still be friends, can't we? And if you want to see your son, you're always welcome. Mark looked openly impatient. Who cares if she comes to see me? I have Aunt Emily now. She's so gentle. Why would I want this tigress? Perhaps I'd grown used to hearing it. I felt strangely calm. Without giving Mark another glance, I stepped into the banquet hall. It didn't matter. I would wait and see whether this gentle stepmother would ever pour her heart into him the way I had. The wedding soon began. The bride and groom took the stage, and Alan, just like in my last life, began to profess his deep love for Emily. Back then, Emily and I were separated by a twist of fate. But even after 16 years, I never forgot her. Thankfully, heaven has eyes. We both divorced, and now we can be together again. To be with someone whose heart and mind align with yours. It was, according to him, the most beautiful thing in the world. But this time, his heartfelt confession didn't land the way it had in my past life, because I was still alive, sitting right there in the audience. As soon as he finished, every head turned toward me. I kept my expression calm, though my heart was pounding with satisfaction. What could be sweeter than a scumbag openly admitting to emotional infidelity? Still, that wasn't enough. I needed to add fuel to the fire. I stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out a thick stack of photocopies. Since Alan has been thinking about his first love for 16 years, I'm deeply touched as well. I'd like to provide everyone with a little more evidence of their great love. Then I tossed the papers into the air. People love gossip, and the guests immediately surged forward, snatching up the copies. As you can see, I said, over the 16 years of our marriage, Alan wrote to Emily at least twice a month. In those letters, they poured out their feelings, expressing tender affection. He also sent her financial support many times and even used work trips as an excuse to visit her in person. When I learned about their relationship, I was moved, so I divorced him to fulfill their love. My son also prefers a gentle stepmother like Emily. Even knowing his father had been writing to his first love all along, he chose to hide it from me. Naturally, I respected his wishes and let him stay with his father. My words sounded magnanimous, but every syllable dripped with sarcasm. In this life, I hadn't caused a public scene at the university, so my reputation was much better, bolstered by the leader's praise. There were even rumors of my understanding nature. Now I looked every bit the pitiful ex-wife betrayed by her husband. The crowd erupted in murmurs. So it wasn't just in his heart? They've been in contact all this time? And he's even helped raise her kid? Wouldn't be surprising if they'd slept together too. And that son of his, what a little fool, helping his dad hide the affair and even liking his stepmom. All this time, Professor White's been preaching morality, and he's actually this kind of man? And he doesn't even realize he's in the wrong. He's bragging about it at his wedding, as if it's proof of his deep love. Absolutely ridiculous. And to think he's been bad-mouthing his ex-wife, hinting she cheated, shameless. Alan's face grew darker by the second, his anger boiling over. Lisa, you're breaking your word. You promised that if I gave you the savings, you'd return the letters. But before he could finish, Emily tugged his sleeve to stop him. Regret flickered across his face. He'd just admitted, in front of everyone, that the contents of those photocopies were real. I gave him a small smile. I promised to give back the originals. I never said I didn't take photos or make copies, and I certainly never promised not to tell people. Alan pointed at me, ready to say more, but Emily pulled him back again. Then, in a sudden show of fragility, she collapsed to the floor. Naturally, saving her took priority, and everyone rushed to get her to the hospital. My eyesight had always been sharp, and I caught the way her eyelids kept twitching. So she was faking it to get out of the scene. Not a bad tactic, actually. Emily's scheming was miles ahead of the father and son duo. After this, there would be plenty of drama to watch. I had also made sure to bring a newspaper reporter to the wedding, so it truly turned into a spectacle. And with the groom being a professor from a prestigious university, the story hit the press the very next day. Overnight, Alan's reputation was ruined. A university may not be tiny, but it isn't huge either. Soon, everyone knew that Professor Alan White from the biology department had spent 16 years in emotional infidelity and eventually committed physical infidelity by marrying his first love. Back then, people were still straightforward, and they viewed this kind of behavior with absolute disdain. Many students openly challenged him during class, and some parents even complained, worried he'd be a bad influence. To calm the outrage, Alan was reassigned to a minor position with no teaching duties, and all his research projects were handed over to others. Alan was deeply resentful, no longer able to keep up the act of being calm and detached. Alan went to argue with the university leaders, insisting, "Even if I may have mishandled some personal matters, what right do you have to touch my job? I've worked here for over a decade, and my record has always been diligent." The leaders had already been unhappy with him, and seeing his self-righteous attitude only made them angrier. "You have the nerve to say that? Who else has ever had a divorce splashed across the newspapers, damaging our school's enrollment? The only reason you're still here in an administrative role is because of your work record. If you don't want to do it, you can leave. Let's see which other university would take you." Shouted down like that, Alan could only slink away. I later heard that, unwilling to stay at a university doing menial work despite his impressive research record, he sent resumes to several other universities. But everyone already knew his glorious achievements, and no school was willing to hire him. He had no choice but to remain at a university as an administrator. Many who had attended his wedding also despised his behavior and demanded their wedding gifts back. But Alan was still counting on those gifts to cover the wedding expenses, so he refused outright. And so the man who had once treated money like dirt, Professor White, ended up having public shouting matches with colleagues over cash gifts. Most people knew it was unlikely they'd ever get their money back, but seeing the supposedly refined, detached Professor White grovel over money left everyone stunned. His relationships with his colleagues only worsened. When Zoe told me about Alan's current situation, she laughed until she could barely breathe. "I used to worry you'd let him off too easily, but you really have a way with this. Finally, I've seen a cheating man get his payback." Sipping my tea, I smiled faintly. This still isn't enough. Life stayed quiet for a while, until 3 months later, when Mark suddenly showed up at the clothing factory looking for me. He was wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in days, the same ones I'd bought him last year. He'd lost weight, his hair was messy, and it was clear no one had taken him for a haircut in a long time. "Mom, I haven't eaten meat in almost a month," he said miserably. "Dad only trusts my stepmom and the kid she brought with her. He doesn't care about me at all. Can't you go talk to him?" He then poured out the whole story. After marrying Emily, Alan had handed over his entire salary to her, not keeping a cent for himself. She controlled all the household finances. At first, Mark had been happy. Emily said children should grow up freely, so she basically left him alone. He could play as long as he wanted, skip tutoring classes if he felt like it. But soon, things changed. The very next day, Emily took her son, Sean, to those tutoring classes. When Mark asked her why, she said, "The money's already paid. If he doesn't go, it's a waste." Skipping tutoring wasn't a big deal to him, but gradually, even toys and the meat on the table were taken away and given to Sean because his little brother's health isn't good. Whenever Mark refused, Emily would cry to Alan. Alan would frown and say, "Mark, you're the older brother. Be kind to your younger brother. Don't be petty like your mother." Alan often ate at the campus cafeteria, but even he began to notice Emily's favoritism. Once, he saw nearly all the meat from a dish going into Sean's bowl, with Mark getting only a couple of pieces, and Alan himself getting none at all. He frowned and said, "Can't you just buy a little more? This isn't enough for 2 kids, let alone us." Emily immediately turned it back on him, crying, "Your salary is barely enough as it is. How can we afford so much meat and fruit, and still send both kids to extracurricular classes? I'd love to, but unless you can bring in more money, how is that possible?" The jab hit Alan's sore spot, and he fell silent. Mark's life of being treated like a little prince was over. For the past month, he'd barely eaten a few bites of meat, and was often left hungry. I wasn't surprised by the mess their household had become. Emily's complaints didn't even need to be exaggerated. Alan's salary had never been high, and with his lofty pride, he had no other source of income. That's exactly why I'd once scrimped and saved to keep our family afloat, so he never had to worry about money. Now with Emily, who only knew romance and daydreams, running the household and raising 2 children in their early teens, things were bound to turn out this way. Naturally, money was running short. I looked at my son, crying his eyes out, and felt strangely calm. Had he truly realized he was wrong and understood my intentions from the past? I doubted it. More likely he was just upset at being mistreated and came looking for my help. Even now, he hadn't said a word about wanting to live with me. Still, he was my son. I couldn't ignore him completely. I took him back to the dorm room I now had at the clothing factory. It was a single room, very simple. Just a bed, a desk, and a few toiletries. "I'm divorced from your dad now," I told him. "I can't manage what goes on in your house, but if you want, you can come live here. I'll help you apply for a dorm room." Mark glanced around, frowned, then quickly shook his head. "No, I'll go back and talk to Dad. He's just been tricked by my stepmom for now." And with that, he bolted out the door. I watched his back and sighed. Clearly, in his heart, there was no real mother-son bond. Everything came down to self-interest. 2 months later, the White's life suddenly seemed to have turned around. While delivering goods to an upscale department store with Zoe, I spotted the four of them, dressed to the nines, shopping for designer brands. I froze for a moment. With Alan's salary, this kind of spending was something he couldn't afford in 100 years. Alan spotted me from a distance too, his face lit with smug satisfaction, especially when he saw me, dressed plainly and sweating from carrying boxes. He stepped forward with a condescending smile. "Lisa, we were husband and wife for so many years. If you're in trouble, tell me. I can lend you money. No need to do such heavy labor." Emily, dressed like a socialite, clung to his arm and added warmly, "Lisa, I owe my good life today to you stepping aside. If you ever need help, you must tell us." I turned to look at Mark. He pretended not to see me, too busy picking out toys from a display case. He was nothing like the bedraggled boy who had come to me before. As expected, he only acknowledged me when I was useful to him. When I wasn't, he wished I'd disappear. I almost laughed, and an idea began to form. "Actually," I said slowly, "things are a bit tight for me right now. A friend's factory needs 100,000 yuan. Since you're both doing so well, I wonder if you could lend it to me." The moment I said the number, Alan's face turned crimson. "Lisa, all this time and you're still so shameless," he snapped. Then he turned to the others. "Let's go. Some people aren't worth our sympathy." The four of them walked off together. As they turned the corner, Emily shot me a triumphant look. Mark, perhaps feeling guilty, avoided looking at me at all. After they were gone, I patted Zoe on the back. "Can you find a way to investigate them? I'm sure something's off." 3 days later, the results came in. Alan had been making promotional appearances for a fake medicine company. I was a little surprised. After all, Alan had always prided himself on being aloof and principled. When he worked on research projects, he would always apply for the smallest possible budget, to the point where no graduate students wanted to join his projects. But once I saw who had arranged it, Emily, I wasn't surprised at all. In front of her, Alan abandoned every principle he ever had. Still, the main reason was probably money. Their funds had clearly run out, so Emily had to find ways to generate income. She got in touch with a fake pharmaceutical company. Although Alan had been reassigned to an administrative role, he still held the title of professor in a university's School of Biomedicine. That was enough to impress the elderly customers the company targeted, men and women in their 70s and 80s. At first, Alan hesitated. How could I lie for money? But after receiving a 1,000 yuan gift from the company, along with assurances that the pills were just vitamins and wouldn't cause any harm, his scruples vanished. After that, Alan made over a dozen appearances for them and even filmed advertisements. He had already made 30 to 40,000 yuan, a fortune in those days. No wonder that family had been walking around so high and mighty. But when I looked at the transcripts of what Alan had said during those promotional events, my brow furrowed deeply. How could he utter things like, cures all diseases and reverses aging, just by taking the pills? Cheating elderly people out of their coffin savings? Alan's bottom line was far lower than I had ever imagined. I must have been brainless to have once believed all his talk about being above worldly concerns. Whether for personal revenge or for the sake of justice, I went straight to the Public Security Bureau to report the fake medicine company. At that time, the authorities were cracking down hard on fraud and public safety violations, so they took my case seriously. 3 days later, during one of the company's promotional meetings, the police raided the event and arrested everyone involved on the spot. Alan was among them. Realizing he couldn't escape, he panicked, burying his head in his hands and covering his face. Even during questioning, he refused to state his identity. But that didn't last long. Police simply asked a few attendees and learned he was a biology professor at a university. The looks they gave him after that were even more full of contempt. A man with such high education, a supposed role model, working with a fake medicine company for money. It was disgraceful. The police notified the university, and the school immediately decided to expel him. In the end, Alan was convicted of fraud and sentenced to prison. Not a long term, just 4 years, but for someone as obsessed with saving face as he was, it was a devastating blow. At the trial, his beard was unkempt, his head hung low. There was no trace left of the aloof, refined man who had once seemed as serene as a chrysanthemum. As for me, because I had successfully reported a company that had scammed countless ordinary people out of their life savings, I was honored with the title of Model Citizen. On the day Alan was sent to prison, Mark came to me, dropped to his knees and begged, "Mom, please help me. Let me stay with you. I really know I was wrong, Mom. You can't just leave me like this." Looking at him, I couldn't tell anymore whether he was truly remorseful or just switching allegiance to whoever could feed him. I sighed. "You're already 15. I'll arrange for you to board at school. I'll send you a monthly allowance to cover average living expenses. I'll support you until you're an adult, and if you get into college, I'll pay for your studies. But after everything that's happened, it's time you learn to grow up." Mark opened his mouth as if to argue, but in the end, he stayed silent. He just bowed his head to the floor and said softly, "I understand." The next time I heard about Alan was 6 months after he got out of prison. He was sent back again, this time for manslaughter after a fight. He was sentenced to 7 years. Naturally, Emily wasn't going to wait for him that long. She found another man to support herself and her son. But no matter how clever she had been before, she was older now, and after all that had happened, her reputation was in ruins. She couldn't find any good man anymore, so she ended up living with a middle-aged migrant worker. Emily wanted to divorce Alan, but he flatly refused. Since he had been expelled from the university, he'd lost their assigned housing, and after getting out of prison, he went looking for her, only to find his once pure and untouchable first love in a screaming match with an old lady over a penny, looking every bit the street market shrew. At her side was a coarse, rough-mannered middle-aged man, the two of them behaving intimately. Alan snapped on the spot. He rushed forward, shouting, "You bitch, I went to prison for you. I ruined my life for you, and you dare put a green hat on me?" Emily hadn't expected him to be out of prison, much less to find her. But with the burly man beside her, she wasn't afraid and shouted right back, "And whose fault is it? You're useless." The argument escalated until Alan lost control and started hitting her. Emily screamed for help, but the man she was living with was only with her for convenience. And the moment trouble came, he bolted. Unfortunately for her, the spot where they were fighting had an exposed steel bar. After Alan shoved Emily, she fell backward and was impaled on the exposed steel bar, the sharp end striking a vital spot. She died instantly. Alan was arrested on the spot, and later, for the crime of accidental homicide, he was sent back to prison, this time sentenced to life. When I heard about Alan's final fate, I could only sigh and say he brought it on himself, before turning my attention back to my work. By then, my business with Joe had expanded across the country, north and south, and we had become one of the leading names in the domestic clothing industry. Looking out at the bright sun over the office building, I felt an unshakable sense of contentment. How wonderful it was. Good and evil always come full circle. In this life, I was determined to live brilliantly.